which is titled, Can Combining the Middle Rio Grande Mobile Bed HEC-RAS Model and the URGWOM Contribute to Improved Restoration Planning? And this will be presented by Kyle Shour with Tetra Tech.
I am Kyle, and I'm a hydraulic engineer at Tetra Tech. Much like Aubrey, I'm at least not fully in my zone here, although I've worked with ecologists over the years. I'm pretty good at predicting flow and sediment, and so I'm excited to present this idea to the group, which is really, this isn't a project that I've done, it's an idea that I've had over the years, having worked with both URGWOM and the Middle Rio Grande HEC-RAS mobile bed model that was presented last year by David Pittsey, and thought, well, why can't we use these models together? And will using these models together be informative and valuable in some way? So Jonathan Abishan helped me develop this presentation and also contributed to the mobile bed HEC-RAS model in some key ways. And he's not here today, but I appreciate his inputs. And so briefly about the two of us, we've both worked around here doing field work in hydraulics and geomorphology and some river restoration, and we'll put our heads together on this one. And I think the results will be sort of interesting. So if I can dive right into it, why is it important to look at the mobile bed sediment transport model? Aubrey just talked a little bit about this and how that might be valuable to some of the work that she's doing, but on a coarser scale, it's pretty clear that the river adjusts, and those adjustments impact these restoration sites throughout the Middle Rio Grande. And so we've all kind of seen the relationship that flow times slope is proportional to sediment discharge times sediment grain size. And what I'm proposing to do today is to use URGWOM to get the flow, and then the HEC-RAS model to get all the other parameters. And so instead of just sort of talking about things qualitatively, we have a way to do a long-term estimate of changes to flow in the river, and then do a long-term estimate of how that will impact the morphology of the river and the change in the sediment budget and things like that. So to give a quick highlight reels of the two models, URGWOM is the Upper Rio Grande Water Operations Model. I'm sure most everyone on this call has at least some exposure to it. It is a single model that extends from the headwaters of the Rio Grande in Colorado all the way down to Fort Quitman, Texas. And it has essentially a rule set, which is a series of algorithms that allow the model to replicate the policy used to operate the various reservoirs and diversions and that kind of thing. It can be run at a daily or a monthly time step, which is valuable, I think, to this discussion today, and we'll talk about a little bit more. Highlight reel, three main types of model runs would be accounting models, which the Bureau of Reclamation updates on a near daily basis, especially during the irrigation season. It doesn't need rules. They put so much information into it that it can calculate everything else. There's the annual operating plans, which take wherever the accounting model left off and forecasts the flow for the remainder of the year based on information from the NRCS. This is the type of model run that people are probably most familiar with, attending the meetings in May where they talk about the April AOP forecasts and what to expect in the year ahead. And then planning runs, which are a longer term kind of decade scale runs that we can use to predict, maybe it's a climate scenario or a change in operational policy. So today I want to focus a little bit on a planning run that was done in 2017. These results were out there, and the purpose of this run wasn't to replicate any specific scenario. Rather, we had just gotten to the point in URGWOM that we could switch from daily to monthly back to daily pretty efficiently. And we wanted to understand, do we want to run this model for planning studies at a daily time step, a monthly time step, is the extra pre-processing to run it at a daily time step so onerous that the quality of results, the improved resolution isn't really worth it? What are the limitations of running the model? So the goal was to just try to get a 150-year sequence of very reasonable flows to run. And so Jesse Roach created this hydrologic sequence. This is output from the Angostura diversion dam, the flow going downstream below the Angostura diversion dam. And you can see, if you pay attention, that it's sort of repeated. He was sort of filling in the gaps to get 150 years. So I thought, well, it'd be interesting to take a part of this flow scenario and see how that, if I'm able to get it into this mobile bed HEC-RAS model, and then what the results would be. So let's focus on this 37-year flow period. And why 37 years? Well, 37 years because when the Middle Rio Grande HEC-RAS model, the mobile bed sediment transport model, was developed, all of the scenarios were 37 years of simulation time. And I'm going to particularly reference one scenario, which is the baseline scenario. And the baseline is sort of the business as usual scenario. We took 37 years of gauge records from right prior to the model being run. And we said, well, the next 37 years will be reasonably represented by those 37 years, previous 37 years. And we all know that that's probably not the case. But it provides a useful reference point when you're evaluating changes. So in this case, we're controlling all the operations for this simulation. The only difference is the flows. So what's unique about this 37 years that I picked from the URGWOM model? The total flow volume in the main stem river is about 89% of the baseline scenario, while the peak flows out of the smaller ephemeral arroyos is up. It's about 107%. So I feel like what's interesting about this is it's not sort of this unheard of possibility moving forward. It's something that's fairly reasonable that could happen in the next few decades. The mobile bed HEC-RAS model is actually 4 separate models representing 4 reaches of the river. It extends from Cochise Dam on down to Elephant Butte Reservoir. Today, we're going to focus just in the Albuquerque reach from Angostura Diversion Dam to Isleta Diversion Dam. There's several tributaries in this reach. URGWOM only has the North Diversion Channel, South Diversion Channel, and the Jemez, as well as the various MRGESCP drains, which contribute flow but not sediment. I estimated the other arroyos, the Las Huertas, Venadas, Barrancas, Calabasias. We know that those all can impact the morphology of the river. We've seen the Calabasias almost plug the river. We've seen the riffle downstream of Barranca provide natural grade control. So I scaled the flow in the baseline based on what was simulated in URGWOM for the North and South Diversion channels. The bed material supply coming down the river was a function of the bed material supply that had been projected in the baseline. I created a rating curve from that. That's not ideal. Ideally, you'd run the Cochise model first, since that upper reach is armored and the load is supply limited. All the sediment sampling and tributary rating curves were developed as part of the model development for the mobile bed model. And this one runs at a daily time step as well. So we're going to take the daily time step URGWOM results, and we're just going to put them straight in, except for a minimal amount of processing on some of these tribs. And here are the results. So the orange line is the baseline scenario, and the blue line is the URGWOM example. And this shows the mean bed elevation. So the red line there is 0 change in elevation. And you can see that the baseline actually aggrades across the board, which might be sort of a surprising result. The reason for that is that prior to this model development, the Jemez Canyon Dam was operated to trap sediment, like almost 100% of it, and control floods. Now it's just used to control floods, and sediment that has historically been stored in that reservoir is being routed downstream. And so that's causing aggradation. But in the URGWOM example, despite having bigger peak flows from some of our tributaries, we're predicting degradation through Bernalillo and into Corrales and Sandia Pueblo. And we're predicting, and then less aggradation through Albuquerque, and then sort of back and forth between aggradation and degradation in the upper part of the Isleta Pueblo. So to present that result a different way, I have this total mass change plot. And this is cumulative sediment mass change. So sediment storage is positive. So if it's sloping up, it's aggrading. If it's sloping down, it's degrading. And if it's flat, it's stable. And this curve essentially shows you the same result as the one I showed you before. That, you know, we're degrading through here, and then in somewhere in southern Corrales, northern Albuquerque, we're starting to aggrade again, and then we're approximately stable in the upper part of Isleta Pueblo. So now this is the same curve, but for the floodplain, and I think it's useful for restoration projects to look at floodplain sedimentation. Depending on the project, you may want that or you may not, or you may be neutral to it, and you may not want it. So for instance, if you're just digging out a swell, planting willows, and giving them a chance to get their roots in the water, you may not care once they're established if you get a layer of sediment that forms on top of them. But if you've built a high flow minnow channel, you want that to stay open and functioning as long as you can, accepting that eventually it's going to evolve into some other kind of habitat. And so this is pretty different. The blue line, our URGWOM example, experiences a lot less floodplain aggradation than the baseline model. And you can see, unsurprisingly, in areas where the channel was degrading, that we didn't have very much floodplain aggradation. This is more or less flat. Then where we switch to aggradation, we get a little bit of aggradation in the floodplain, and then where our channel is more or less stable, we don't get much floodplain aggradation. So this is why we're seeing less aggradation in general out of the URGWOM example. So I've thrown a curveball in here, and I apologize. I was realizing as I was practicing these slides this morning that I've switched colors on myself and on you. So in this case, the blue is the baseline, and the orange is the URGWOM example. And one big takeaway here is sediment yield across the board is, or in sediment into the reach. So the total kind of sediment budget is a lot smaller by more than 10 million tons over the 37-year period for the URGWOM example. And so that makes sense. Then we're seeing less aggradation or even degradation where we were seeing aggradation before. And another key takeaway here is that HEMES and the Angostura diversion, the supply from upstream over Angostura diversion dam, are pretty key. That I feel like Angostura diversion dam is a little surprising. You think of that reach as being sediment starved and armored, and you're not getting much sediment out of it. But I'll point out that there are some pretty important tributaries that can deliver a lot of sediment to the reach there, like the Tonke and the Taños. And then the HEMES, obviously, I think is a little bit more intuitive, right? We've seen a lot more sediment coming out of that in recent years because of the change in operations at the dam. So another thing that I want to highlight is the Barranca. The changes at the Barranca were less, and the Barranca contributed less than 1 million tons in both runs. However, the size of the sediment that gets contributed matters. And a bit of a tangent, but one of the results that we saw doing the modeling study with the Middle Rio Grande model was that the grade control provided by these riffles below tributaries is important to limiting incision in the river. And while the Barranca's riffle is pretty small, if you go out to other places in the Rio Grande, like the Salado or the Tonke or the Las Cañas south of Socorro, you can see some pretty sizable riffles there. So the model can be used to predict not only the amount of sediment that's coming in and the amount of sediment that's eroding or being deposited, but how the size of the sediment changes as well, and the role that that sediment size plays. So really quickly, I want to walk through an example application before I run out of time. Let's say you want to build a high flow side channel and you have these model results. And let's hypothetically say that these two below what you expect to see. So you might want to put that high flow channel where the bed is either stable or grading, but not where you're expecting a huge amount of sediment chain flux and aggradation. So you're looking at the Albuquerque region channel to fill in with sediment. So you look at the floodplain mesh changes and you say, well, I don't want these areas because they're grading a lot and that's going to fill in my channel. So you can eliminate those, and now you've got 6 river miles or so to focus on in a bit more detailed study. I think I'm out of time in my example, but I would go into URGWOM and I would look at the flow duration curve from that, use that to pick a number of days per year that you're looking at inundation for, come up with some flow targets, and run the model without sediment transport with the fixed bed, just to see what the earthwork requirements would be and what good options that you have out there. Big picture conclusion. I think coupling URGWOM and this mobile bed HEC-RAS model or other hydraulics models makes a lot of sense, and it's not often done. Sediment from tributaries is really important, not only in the amount of it, but the size of it, and work to model those impacts and understand the sediment yield from these tributaries, I think is going to be really valuable. And relatively small changes in runoff volume the river is sensitive to that, and you can expect morphological response. Another interesting application for fixed bed simulations would be taking the AOP results, running the fixed bed, and seeing where maybe you need to prioritize adaptive management or minnow salvage. There are some limitations to this model, which were sort of highlighted last year, and that's that we can't simulate sediment plugs and we can't simulate width changes. So looking at these results in a relative sense, comparing back to a baseline, I think is important to do. I appreciate you letting me go a couple minutes over here, and appreciate the audience today. I hope you guys were interested in what I had to present. If my contact information and Jonathan's contact information is there if you want it.
Thanks, Kyle. That was a very interesting presentation. In the interest of time, we will be moving on to the next presentation, but feel free to type your questions into the chat if you'd like Wes to distribute questions to Kyle. He's also provided his contact information.